This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Any quick reaction on what's going on with Elon Musk and President Trump on Twitter right now?
Oh man, the girls are fighting, aren't they?
Quiet Riot.
Hello, and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the root touch-up to Thursday's full head of highlights. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex.
And I'm Kenny, your new regular Sunday panellist and choir boy.
So, boys, have you missed me?
A lot. It's been healthy to miss you, I think, because we both got to
Absence makes the
appreciate
heart grow fonder.
Absolutely.
I had quite a few people come up to me at an event we did at Best of Britain saying, "Oh, I hope you've had a lovely holiday." And I was like, "Sorry, what?" And they went, you've not been on Quiet Riot Sunday School or the main show." And I went, "Yes, because I've been working so hard. I haven't had the time."
Right, listen.
I'm glad I looked like I'd been on holiday.
Can I just say, let's not do loads of chit-chat today because I'm really, really gasping to get into the news. It's been, wow, what an end to the week it's been.
Before we do crack on with the show, though, Alex, we need to just give a quick reminder to our beautiful listeners to please head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod to back us for as little as £5 a month, because it really does help to keep us bringing you fresh content on the regular. And if you already do that, then a hearty, enormous thank you from all of us.
Here to that. And also do subscribe, leave us a review, visit our bookshop, and share an episode with a friend who might enjoy it to help us grow our audience.
Right, enough of the collection plate, you two. Time for the sermon.
Quiet Riot.
Okay, let's kick things off with the inevitable, spectacular, public and possibly irreversible falling out between, of course, Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Once mutual admirers with shared enemies and a fondness for chaos, the bromance appears to be officially over. And unlike most Twitter spats, this one is already hitting the markets. What began as disagreements over Trump's sweeping one big beautiful bill has exploded into something far bigger, with Elon Musk accusing the former president of being named in the now withheld Jeffrey Epstein files. Ooh. Just to recap, Trump introduced a monster legislative package that Musk called a disgusting abomination. At least I think he was referring to the package and not to Trump himself. Specifically over tax breaks, electric vehicle subsidies, little klaxon there, and mounting debt. The White House immediately retaliated, threatening to pull Musk's government contracts, and that's when things really escalated. Then, in a post on X, Musk dropped what one outlet called a really big bomb. At real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they've not been made public. Have a nice day, DGT, said Musk. Now, not everyone is happy, of course. California is experiencing shortages of copium, as Fox News has basically downed it all with a whiskey chaser. Jesse Waters, well, rye. Sean Hannity is angry, and Laura Ingraham, just sad.
Now, stop to think how happy the media and the Democrats are today. They always wanted to break this alliance. I said this last week, and today they got their wish.
Let's all take a moment to think about that.
I love real Donald Trump as much as a straight man can love another man. That was only February. February, that was. The 7th of February. Oh, dearie me. Naomi, Trump is now a Tesla owner who hates Musk. Surely this will make him more popular than ever.
I mean, it is also incredibly predictable. I think we predicted it, many others did. These kind of guys fall out with people all the time. And when two big personalities with hot tempers align with one another, it's surely only a matter of time before they fall out. But it is all quite incredible, the extent to which they're playing it all out on social media. And the Epstein files thing, I mean, the madness of that is that Musk is a guy who willingly brings his own children into the White House to hang out with Donald Trump. Yet he now is accusing him of being part of the Epstein gang, group, or circle, whatever pejorative name one has to give to people who were in that cabal that trafficked minors around the world in order to have sex with them. So either it is absolute nonsense and he's just using us as a horrible, tactic to try and get back at a guy who he's now had a major falling out with, or he was kind of happy to put his child in that environment, and neither of those is okay. One obviously much worse than the other.
Now, let's remember that he's got previous on these sort of accusations as well, hasn't he? When the Thai cave rescue was going on, he made the paedophile allegations against the British guy who was over there, the cave diver who was trying to help out.
That's right, yeah.
So just because we like to see these guys shouting, we probably should have a huge pinch of salt with all of these sorts of accusations.
It's interesting looking back 12 months ago to Trump being asked the question of whether he would release the Epstein files. Let's have a little listen what he said.
Some people think that one way to build trust is to declassify things. So if you were president, would you declassify, you can answer yes or no to these. Yeah. Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah. I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. But I think I would.
So...
yeah, let's release the JFK files. Yeah, let's release what we know about the moon landings. Yeah, maybe we won't release the Epstein things.
I mean, you could hear the penny drop as if it come from the moon, couldn't you?
Yeah, it's hard to look at that. I mean, I will agree with you, Naomi. I think this latest season of Real Housewives of Washington, D.C. has been a little bit predictable, but still unmissable. The oozing mess of it all is worse than I could ever have expected. At some point, Musk seemed to be live tweeting on comments that Trump was making live in a presser in the Oval Office. It's just incredible. Jimmy Kimmel likened it to running down the stairs on Christmas morning and finding a second Christmas tree. You expect it to be a good day, but this was extra good. The big question, I guess, is now that Mummy and Daddy have fallen out, who gets custody of JD?
Well, I did notice that Musk had sort of tweeted a laughing emoji in a quote tweet of a JD Vance tweet about going on to do some media and, oh, ha, 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 what could we possibly find to talk about today? Today being the day after that whole shebang happened between Musk and Trump. So, it took quite a while, I think, for Vance to tweet out support for Trump.
Almost 48 hours from the whole thing falling apart. And it was quite lukewarm. I mean, it was like if you wanted to make a pro forma supportive statement, is what you'd say. It was along the lines of Donald Trump helped get us elected and I'm proud to stand by him. That kind of thing. It wasn't exactly showering Trump with praise or supporting the bill. It was something along the lines of he's US president and the bill will pass, which is a little bit damning with faint praise. And it's an interesting dynamic, because J.D. Vance is a young politician with obviously big ambitions, and Musk is someone that can fund his career for life. Donald Trump is the man who has all the power right at this moment. But long term, Musk might be a very, very valuable ally. And we're kind of seeing that a little bit in the lawmakers, the ones that have made a statement of any sort. They've come out in support of Trump, most of them, I think, except two who were unhappy about the tax bill anyway and had voted against it. But I can't help but wonder, are we in for a roller coaster ride come the primaries for the midterms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on one reading of it, J.D. Vance is like the political equivalent of a child who pretends to love both mom and dad until he figures out which one is writing the bigger check. And my money might be on him launching some kind of America First, but also Elon's algorithms pack, or just showing up in court wearing a red cap and a Tesla jacket asking to be adopted by Peter Thiel. And you're right, we've got elections next year. The midterms are coming, and Musk has got a limitless checkbook if he wants to. If he does want to stay involved in the political sphere in which he's now finds himself, maybe he got bored of running companies and those kinds of things and wanted to dip his toe into the world of politics, he could fund a really significant number of current Congress people senators who are up for re-election next year.
I guess it depends on whether he thinks he can inflict a fatal enough wound at this juncture. If he thinks he can actually make the midterms a big problem for Trump, everything about his personality that we know so far says he's going to go for it, right?
What really stuck out for me today was I was waiting to see what would make the headlines. What's going to be the biggest thing that comes out of all this? Is it going to be Trump threatening to kick Musk out of all his defense contracts without apparently asking any of the defense experts about it? Or is it going to be Musk saying, I'm just going to mothball the rocket that gets people to and from the International Space Station?
That's a worrying day if you're an astronaut up there at the moment.
At this point in time, there's lots of kids going, what do you want to be, an astronaut? Hell no, I want to be a taxi driver. That's what I want to be, a taxi driver down here. But it turned out that actually the biggest headline over the last couple of hours has been that Trump is going to sell his car. I mean, the sense of anticlimax when I saw that leading a lot of the news sites was, really?
I mean, he seems to be tacoing this, right?
Yes.
You went here last week, Naomi, sorry. So TACO is the new acronym that's been attached to Trump, and he's really, really annoyed about it. It stands for Trump always chickens out. So he's tacoing this one, I think. He seems to really be holding back, which would seem to mean one of two things. Either when he goes for Musk, he will properly fuck him, and he's saving his spite and his energy for one big move, or he's a little bit worried that Musk might have a lot of dirt on him, I guess.
He's definitely met his match. You know, in as much as Trump has ever met somebody who can behave in an obnoxious enough way to neutralize Trump, Musk is the guy who's done it. I mean, let's face it, they both have their own social media platforms with which to, hurl insults at each other. But it's a properly high-stakes game, isn't it? And Trump's not known for holding back. His brain doesn't work that way. He said today that Musk isn't on his mind, before he then gave us 2 or 3 reasons why Musk is very much on his mind.
I mean, it was all pure Musk, like that shoot from the hip, tweet from the bunker. And my feel of reading it over the course of the last day or so is that it's less like a calculated move, more like a late night, let's be kind of say Red Bull fueled. I know something you don't moment.
Yeah.
And if there is substance behind it, I think Team Trump are going to go into full panic lockdown. And if not, Musk's just gifted him the look at the unhinged billionaire trying to smear me defense. So yeah, it is a big gamble and presumably going to get a lot messier.
Can I ask something else? Do you think there is a way back for Musk? I mean, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, is there some path of rehabilitation for him? Or has he simply ended up with his brand basically alienating half the world and then alienating the other half of the world?
Well, he's got more than one brand, hasn't he? Tesla's the one that we hear about, but as things stand, unless Trump makes good on his promise to freeze him out of defense contracts, I can't imagine that Musk is going to be struggling to pay his electricity and water bills over the next 5 to 10 years.
We could see the algorithms being tweaked quite heavily on X, favouring the likes of us and Democrats and centrist, progressive, liberal, democratic voices. And I think, Alex, what you're asking is he now busted flush in terms of really big investment? If he wants to turn the fortunes of the Tesla brand around, if he wants to launch new product, obviously things like SpaceX are so heavily reliant on funding from central government that if that gets pulled, he would find it impossible, I think, to raise that kind of money on the capital markets. And even he's not rich enough to fund all of that on his own. So I think you're right to question whether wise investors would put money behind anything he does now, because it's not obvious that he has the political connections to get government grants for what he does. He seems to have burnt bridges there pretty badly. And secondly, that he doesn't seem to have the small p political nose to now keep a brand alive. It was such a strategic error to align with very, very right-wing climate skeptic movement of MAGA when you own the most famous eco-friendly brand in the world. So his judgment is poor and his relationships are shot.
Just let me ask one question. I mean, we're seeing this from an Anglocentric perspective, aren't we? Security implications aside, there is nothing to stop him taking his technology and taking his business in a direction that perhaps brings them closer to the Middle East, for example.
Yeah,
that's true.
There are plenty of other places. Who knows what China's view on this is, for example. Trump's plan to have a Golden Dome defense over the United States really needs companies like Musk, and it needs people like Musk, whatever we think of his lunatic outbursts.
The only thing I will point out that goes counter to this is a lot of the MAGA crowd, the big influencers, the YouTubers, the podcasters, the newsletter people, a lot of the blue ticks are monetizing it through X. So a lot of them depend on X for reach, and they depend on X for actual income. Musk is in quite a powerful position when it comes to them, as we saw with the incident with Laura Loomer over the paternity of some child, blew up last year, and he just ended up sort of taking her blue tick away and banning her from Twitter for a couple of months, which basically took away her living. This has the potential to unravel in very, very damaging ways for the administration, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't just host the right, he platformed them, literally and figuratively. And if he turns on that wing of politics, as he may do in aggregate, not just to Trump directly, and starts tweaking the algorithms to favour rival voices, it could upend the whole MAGA media machine. It is effectively like cutting off their Wi-Fi. And it's suddenly not a safe space for whatever conspiracy they're peddling at the time, but a kind of glitchy, X-rated episode of Succession.
Oh, Christ, I hope we don't see loads of them coming over to Blue Sky. I don't think I could take that. It is important to briefly pause this orgy of schadenfreude, I think, in order to mark the lives that Musk has genuinely blighted in his short stint in government. You know, the thousands of civil servants who walked into work one Monday morning and were asked to clear their desks, having done absolutely nothing wrong, not to mention the thousands of people around the world who depend on USAID programs and are now starving or worse. The worst thing that can happen to these two sociopaths is a bruised ego. It is the little people who always pay the price. And we do need to, in our glee, remember that, I think.
Yes, of course. And it is joyful to watch lots of people in meltdown over, you know, how to report this, and the right-wing media not knowing which side to come down on and all of that. But I mean, come on, it has been horrific for so many hundreds of thousands of people around the world. And I've seen reports today that actually the Doge cuts are now being rolled back, and the government is panicking about there being insufficient numbers of people to carry out very basic functions of government that need doing. So hopefully there will be some unwinding of the damage that's been done.
On any week, we would be talking about Thomas Fugate, and he's now just a little footnote. And this is the 22-year-old that's just been appointed with absolutely no previous government, leadership, professional, security experience. He's been chosen by Donald Trump to head the Center for Prevention of Terrorism.
It would be understandable if the idea of a young adult still on his parents' health insurance being in charge of stopping terrorism unnerves you. But some folks in the news found his LinkedIn, and he has worked at, internship, another internship, and, landscape business owner. Okay, well, that's entrepreneurial. What was his portfolio? Performed lawn care work around my neighborhood. My duties consisted of mowing the yard, weed whacking the weeds, then cleanup of debris. You mowed your neighbor's lawn, you damn fetus.
And this person is now in charge of America's terrorism prevention schemes. Also,
now, stop to think how happy the media and the Democrats are today.
Quiet Riot. Today's episode is sponsored by the wonderful people at Shopify. Alex, do you recognise that sound?
I can't say that I do.
Well, it is the sound of a sale on Shopify. I've been using Shopify for years to power the Best for Britain shop, and it's got me thinking that we definitely need to use Shopify for selling Quiet Riot merch.
Oh, and we're getting there, aren't we? We're very close to getting our first Quiet Riot merchandise up and running. I've seen some early designs. It feels like everyone but me has a side hustle nowadays. I don't even have a Substack.
Exactly. And Shopify, it just sort of like takes all of the hassle out of selling things. I don't know what we'd do without it at Best for Britain, because it's an all-in-one commerce platform. You don't need to learn any tricky coding or faff around with the back end of your website. It's very much plug and play, and it just works. And it means that you can just get on with selling things quickly, easily, and cost effectively.
I mean, for a small company like us, there's only the three of us. That's me sold, because the last thing I want to be doing is trying to manage yet another process. And I like the idea that Shopify can help you get selling across other marketplaces like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, not just your own site. Because I think that actually there is the potential for our merchandise to go viral. You know, I really feel it in my bones, especially our range of Christmas jumpers. I think they will do very, very well. Plus, I hear that unlike us, Shopify have won awards. And with an extensive business course library, they're just there ready to support a business in every way they need.
Quite right, listeners. Shopify want to help you to get selling as well. So they've got an incredible deal. You can sign up for a £1 only trial month at shopify.co.uk/Quiet Riot. That's all lowercase.
So go to shopify.co.uk/Quiet Riot to take your business to the next level today. Huge thanks to today's sponsor, Shopify, and remember to sign up for a £1 trial period at shopify.co.uk/Quiet Riot, all lowercase. Hi, this is Alex speaking from the slightly less distant past than the rest of the episode. So, a few minutes after we recorded this episode, Zia Yusuf returned to the Reform UK fold. In our defence, it was only a few hours before we recorded this episode that he had left the Reform UK fold, and by the time you listen to this, he may have left again. Who knows? But I had a little listen to the segment, and all the points in the discussion therein are completely irrelevant. I just thought I'd let you know why his return isn't mentioned explicitly in it.
Quiet Riot. Now let's turn to the latest public brawl of the nationalist right this side of the Atlantic. A dramatic and deeply revealing fallout between Reform UK's now ex-chairman Zia Yusuf and its leader Nigel Farage. The row, which centres on Yusuf's firm opposition to a proposed burqa ban, has gone from internal disagreement to full-blown political theatre, playing out across talk shows, social media and hastily drafted press releases. Zia Yusuf, a self-described British Muslim patriot, once seen as the party's more business-minded and modernising and professionalising force, publicly condemned Farage's renewed call for a national ban on face coverings. This was after the maiden speech by their newly elected MP, Sarah Pochin, and the backlash was swift. Party insiders briefed against Yusuf. Reform's base erupted in protest, and Farage himself accused Yusuf of being out of step with public opinion, as if that opinion were monolithic and his alone to define.
The online reaction from Reform UK supporters and voters, quite a lot of happiness in the air that Mr. Yusuf has gone. Why do you think that is?
I think that the persistent campaign against him on X, and much of it coming from Indian bots,
right,
has perhaps, made some Reform members question him, question his motives. All of that's completely unfair. But it will have added to his sense of, I want a life.
Yeah. When and how did you find out?
I spoke to him yesterday morning, and he did seem very, very disengaged.
I mean, how did you find out about the resignation? Did you find out first, or was it...
No, I was given a 10-minute warning.
Right.
That it was going to come. I'm disappointed, I'm sad, and he's a loss. He's a loss. There is a gap there, particularly around Doge.
But behind the headlines, this spat exposes something deeper, a profound identity crisis within Reform UK. Is it a party of libertarian populists, railing against overreach and big government, or is it now leaning into overt culture war authoritarianism, banning what people wear, how they worship, who they are? And even if their top brass can't agree, what happens next? So to both of you, what does this kind of very public clash between Farage and Yusuf tell us about the contradictions at the heart of the party's identity? Can you be libertarian and authoritarian at the same time?
There's
No,
a tough one,
I
isn't
mean,
it?
yeah.
I mean, really.
Shall we move on to the next topic, if that's the central question? I'll tell you what the more nuanced answer is, Naomi. That contradiction does exist in voters' minds. I always cite something a Greek taxi driver said to me once about 10 years ago when he described the authoritarian right as people who think the harshest possible rules should apply to everyone else.
Yes.
And that is a contradiction in the mind of a lot of voters. They think that everyone else should be behaving, under very, very strict rules, but that they should be personally free to do whatever they want because they're the good guys. And so, irreconcilable as that conundrum is, it is an appealing one to voters out there.
There's a different way of thinking about it as well, a less binary way. If you drew the Venn diagram of how these people are operating and you put libertarian as one of the circles and authoritarian as a second, if you were to stick populism in as a third and looked at where the overlaps happen, I think you'd find that, yes, you can be libertarian and authoritarian at the same time, as long as you take a very populist approach to doing it. People aren't going to analyse your political philosophy necessarily as thoroughly as our listeners might.
Yeah, economics, ditto. You could put left-leaning and right-leaning economic policies in there, let's say low taxes but well-funded public services, and populists would occupy significant bit of both. Because I guess that's the nature of populism. They promise whatever is popular. They promise easy solutions to problems that involve trade-offs.
And so do you think that Yusuf just didn't do his homework? I mean, he is a self-described British Muslim. This is a party with a very long heritage of Islamophobia, if you take the heritage to include the Brexit Party and UKIP before it. So can he really be surprised that its politicians have these views? Or did he just think he knew that they had them, but that he could reform them?
I think there's a point that brings both the first question and the point you just made, Naomi, together. And it's an incredibly important point that Reform UK's identity is Nigel Farage's identity, isn't it? It's as close to the cult of the personality as we ever want to get in this country. Trying to reform Reform's identity, we would have to look at whether or not we could reform him. Zia Yusuf may have thought that was possible, but it's not, because that's the winning brand, isn't it?
And the only party that continued to have success after he left it was the Conservative Party, which he left in the 90s. And it carried on obviously being a very successful political force in the UK, maybe no longer, but not because of him departing. He, left UKIP and they went down. He left Brexit Party. Tice tried to keep it going, couldn't. So you're right, the cult of personality around him is everything, and the party would not be doing anywhere near as well as it is at the moment if he were not the figurehead.
I think he pumped a lot of money into it as well.
Zia
by the
Yusuf.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. He was brought in for his mega millions, for sure. But it was also quite handy to have him help diversify their image. And so how damaging do you think the fallout might be in their attempt to broaden the party's appeal beyond the traditional base, which is the very devout cult following of Nigel Farage?
We're going to come on to this in a few minutes when we talk about the Scottish by-election, but I don't think it's going to be as damaging as it might have been 12 months ago. The behind-the-scenes changes that have happened to professionalise the organisation have kicked into some level, and now what we're seeing is success from Reform for various reasons, despite Nigel Farage's image, as well as because of Farage's image. And I think that's a tipping point in terms of the potential success that the party could have, despite having to rely on one man as its poster boy.
Yeah, I agree with that to an extent, except that everybody credited Yusuf as being the guy that was doing the professionalising. Yeah. Somebody who has much more recently than Farage been involved in actual business and corporation and how you run an institution, if you like, without his advice and all of that, or insistence that vetting is done in a certain way. I wonder if they'll be able to maintain that. And we did see them put up some really loony candidates anyway at the local elections just gone. So maybe you're right, but maybe this is a turning point for the party in terms of losing that credibility from Yusuf.
There is a distinct, I never thought the leopards, etc., flavour to this, for sure, Naomi. Yeah. He can't not have known what they were. But I guess also he can't not have hoped that he could bring them to a more moderate place on certain policies that he thought are costing them votes, because they hark back to a particular image that they have. So while I think this might please their base, I think it might turn off quite a lot of more moderate voters. Not this particular thing, but a general shift to more far-right, red meat, race baiting.
I mean, Tommy Robinson's X-feed and comments were full of praise for Farage getting rid of Yusuf.
Yeah, of course. I guess what I'm saying is that my impression of the story as it unfolded was that there was something dysfunctional internally in terms of comms, because it seemed, first of all, that it was her without this being party policy. And then I don't know if Farage rode behind it because he saw the reaction, or if this genuinely had been decided at a more central level to be her maiden question asked in PMQs. But it's clear that I don't think Yusuf knew about it. I think he was under the impression this wasn't party policy and seemed quite surprised when it turned out it was party policy.
Well, that's his point, isn't it? It's that you can't ask the Prime Minister a question about policy when it is not your own party's policy. So he was very clear that this is not party policy that's been agreed. And herein lies the problem with a new party that for a very long time wasn't even legally registered as a political party. It was a limited company entirely under the control of Nigel Farage as the only shareholder, and they didn't have proper constitutional remit in terms of how you could elect the leader or get rid of the leader or hold internal party elections and or develop policy, which seems to be, you're right, the issue here, that the mechanism for how official party policy gets adopted is clearly lacking. Back to your point about, did he hope that he could reform it from within or didn't think leopards would eat my face? You have to believe people who they are the first time they tell you. And Zia Yusuf will have known that this MP posed with a mug with Keir Starmer wearing a hijab on it and the two-tier Keir right-wing policing trope written on it. This was her identifying with the far right who were peddling this meme all over the internet in the wake of the Southport killings last year in an attempt to portray Keir Starmer as somebody who was not on the side of white people, who held them to a much higher level of account than he does people from minority backgrounds. And so Zia Yusuf knew all of this. She does become a candidate in a by-election. She does then win it. And he cannot be that surprised about it. He just cannot be. I want to move it on a little bit, though, from him and the fallout with Farage and ask you both about Farage's own position on this. He is saying that he is in step with the public on the burqa ban. But is this really about public sentiment, or is it about pushing performative outrage after performative outrage to paper over the lack of serious policy that you just mentioned, Alex?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you know, they would love to talk about this stuff endlessly because there is very little depth to their program. They have very little to say on health. In fact, every time they talk about health, they get in trouble because they end up saying something different from last time and hinting at people having to pay. Every time they talk about education, they get in trouble. Every time they talk about taxes, their numbers don't add up. So talking about banning head coverings is a perfect situation for them. The caveat I would add is that Reform UK specifically is in the process of rebranding, is in the process of saying that's not us anymore. They lob accusations at us for being X, Y, and Z, and clearly that's not the case. And I think this kind of story has the potential to damage them in that particular endeavor. So I think it's the kind of thing that might fire up 20%, but mean they can't get the next 10% that they really need to get their hands on real power.
Kenny, Alex touched on the point around the thinness of policy thinking and the party getting caught out when it does dip its toe into anything semi-serious. But moving on to the personalities involved, yes, of course, they need to have a policy offering and we need to be able to hold them to account on that and scrutinise it before being asked to vote for them properly at a general election. But we'll also need to know who the runners and riders are. We will need to know who is his chancellor, who is his home secretary, who is his foreign secretary. Do you get a sense that among the band of politicians he's got now, which of them would be a credible candidate for any great office of state? And do any of them sort of feel secure enough, given that we've now seen Rupert Lowe and Zia Yusuf in the space of a few months kind of be unceremoniously dumped from the party?
Well, no and no, of course, would be the answer. But at the same time, it's not the prime concern for Farage or for Reform at this point. The point in this party's development now is it's a classic growing pain, isn't it, that things fall apart internally. And yet, because there is some momentum, the party itself continues to become more and more successful despite what's going on and despite the apparent lack of talent in the ranks. And let's not kid ourselves that the other parties are absolutely chock-a-block with people that we look at and go, my goodness me, there's a Prime Minister of the future, I'd vote for that party. At the end of the day, voters are not going to cast their vote in the current political climate based on A, the talent pool, and B, a deep and well thought out set of policies. We know what the 2 or 3 dog whistle policies are for reform. We know what the policies are that get discussed on the doorsteps. And that's it for most of the voting population, I would suggest.
I can't agree with that, Kenny, but I will hold the details of my disagreement for the next segment because they are relevant. All I would say for now is that at the very least, coming up to a general election, they will have to say this person will be my chancellor, this person will be my home secretary, and this person will be my foreign secretary. That means that Lee Anderson gets one of those 3 jobs. So which one would you give him?
Exactly.
Do you see what I mean? So it does at some point become a problem.
But I will just point out, and I think where Kenny might be onto something, is that we do have a much more presidential style of election at general election time than we should do for a parliamentary democracy. And when we look at the latest polling from our friends at More in Common, Nigel Farage is now seen to have more solid, get this, working class credentials than Keir Starmer, who of course went to a state school. Well, Farage was very expensively privately educated. 19% see the Reform leader as a member of the working class and only 17% for Starmer. Now, those numbers are close and both very, very low, but it is incredibly interesting to see that.
I take all of that on board, but maybe it's because I'm so deeply steeped right now in the stories of Aesop and how fables work. But an effective political attack is one that most people feel is probably true. And so all the parties standing against reform, they'll be asking, who's your chancellor? Who's your foreign secretary? Go on, tell us. And that will strike home because it's true, and most people know it in their bones, that it's a massive, massive weakness. Also,
now, stop to think how happy the media and the Democrats are today.
Quiet riot.
Now, this is an advertisement from BetterHelp. Thanks to them for sponsoring today's show. 1 in 8 men is thought to have a mental health disorder. That's a huge amount of suffering, and much of it goes unnoticed and without help. We live in a pressure cooker world, and it's no secret that bottling things up can lead to depression, burnout, and other problems. And while we might be told that it's okay to struggle, the truth is that men in particular still find it difficult to open up about their burdens. If you're a man, and this sounds close to home, then I really can't emphasise how important it is that you reach out to someone you can trust and talk to, whether that's a friend, a loved one, or a therapist. My experience with therapy is that it can be the first step towards regaining control of your life, whatever mental health challenges you may be facing. And if you're sceptical or nervous about this approach, I can assure you it's far better than doing nothing, changing nothing, and suffering silently. If you're looking for somewhere to start, then BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform with more than 5,000 therapists in the UK. You can join a session with a UK therapist and you can switch therapists at any time. Its users rate it highly. BetterHelp has an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 based on 1.7 million client reviews. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off the first month at betterhelp.com/quietriot. That's betterhelp.com/quietriot.
Quiet riot. What's your message now to Nigel Farage? He's probably bought a kilt now. He'll be up in Rothman, won't he?
All I'd say is good morning, Nigel, Eid Mubarak, and I hope you enjoyed the result last night.
now let's head north of the border and make no mistake, last night's by-election results in Hamilton, Lark Hall and Stonehouse is more than just local politics. Scottish Labour reclaimed a seat from the SNP in a dramatic three-way battle, winning just under 32% to the SNP's 29%, while Reform UK was third with 26%. This comes at a moment when the SNP is clearly under pressure, there's internal turmoil, and all of it is playing out in front of the voters. At the same time, Reform UK's breakthrough shows that traditional allegiances are shifting in unexpected ways. Talking of shock results for the team in red, the bookies were offering longer odds on a Labour win last night than they were on Aberdeen winning the Scottish Cup final against Celtic. The former was 11-1, the latter 8-1. The question now is whether this is a singular victory or the beginning of a broader realignment ahead of next year's Holyrood elections, and what should Labour make of this, especially as they aim to rebuild their foothold in Scotland. So, to both of you, what's your gut reaction to the result?
There's nothing but sadness for all the establishment parties out of last night's result. This by-election took place in Scotland's, what would have been its industrial heartlands. You know, parents and grandparents, certainly grandparents, would have been miners in some of these towns. It's on the M74 corridor if you come out of Glasgow and drive south to the southeast. For decades was a Labour heartland. And then latterly, as you said, Alex, since the seat was formed, it's been an SNP stronghold. So it was significant that Labour took it back from the SNP, but Labour's share of the vote dropped since the last election, the last comparable election in 2021. That's not good news for them. And of course, it's not good news for the SNP because they've lost what up until very recently was a pretty safe seat.
Labour's vote, I think, dropped by 2%.
Yeah.
The SNP's vote dropped, I think, by 16%, I saw somewhere.
I think that the bare numbers kind of play it out in a like slightly easier way to understand than percentages. So turnout was down 9,000 since 2021. The Tories have gone down almost 5,000, most of that over to Reform. SNP down almost 9,000 and Labour down almost 4,000. So proportionally, Con down the most, then the SNP. And it looks to me as if there was a big Tory to Reform shift, but some SNP to Reform shift. And otherwise, it's kind of differential abstention. And Kenny is right. No one will really feel like celebrating. There'll be relief from Labour, but certainly a real feeling that there is fatigue with the internal chaos of SNP, that they're running out of steam after so long in government. But I think, you know, if you're looking on the bright side for Labour, they ran a solid hyper-local campaign against the backdrop, can I say, of an incredibly racist campaign run by Reform against Anna Sarwar. And they showed that they were the grown-ups in the room again. And I think that matters very much for Holyrood next year. But it also matters nationally too, because it kind of chips away at the idea that has been brewing over the last few months that Labour are not going to be able to hold a huge amount in Scotland come the next general election because of the unpopularity they're facing in the national polls.
I think we should also remember, I mean, you mentioned, Naomi, Labour running a very good campaign. I mean, by 21st century standards, it was a really quite strange campaign. Their candidate, the victorious candidate, Davy Russell, didn't do any TV interviews. He avoided debates. He didn't even appear on the sort of BBC's Good Morning Scotland programme. They really stayed away from all the mainstream media opportunities that we would have expected them to be flocking to. You know, the contrast between what Davy Russell was doing and what Trump and Musk are doing just couldn't be greater. You know, on one side of the Atlantic, you've got two grown adults, allegedly, with their own social media platforms lobbing bombs at each other. Meanwhile, the Labour team in Scotland were tramping the streets and knocking on doors. And by doing that, they were able to discuss things that actually mattered a damn to the voters. So they weren't discussing the sort of things that the Westminster bubble would discuss. They probably weren't discussing Keir Starmer's effectiveness that much either. They certainly would have been if they were on TV. They would have been discussing things like the winter fuel allowance. All the classic core policies we know actually make a difference. And it was in many ways an old-fashioned Liberal Democrat campaign that they were running. And then one other thing, with Davy Russell himself, he's a classic old-school local candidate. You know, he's a man who still lives in the constituency. He started his working life at digging holes in roads, basically, and worked his way up in local government. He knows a working life from working on the roads right the way through to how government and authority works. He's a charity trustee. He was a deputy Lord Lieutenant, which means he gets to represent the monarch at various local events. So he's not a classic sort of Labour appointee, but he is a classic local government election candidate, if you like.
I'm never so stunned as when sometimes I hear the take of the two of you on something and I just don't recognise a single word of it. My read of what happened yesterday could not be more different. I think Labour will be fucking delighted. They will be over the moon about what happened. The SNP were billing it as a two-horse race between them and Reform. Reform were billing it as a two-horse race between them and the SNP. Labour were being written off by pollsters as definitely losing and probably coming third. Reform had an extremely strong local candidate that defected from the Tories. and poured a ton of money into this. Everyone was saying how many leaflets and glossy campaign events and buses parked outside supermarkets. Reform were really pumping money into this to make this happen, because the two-horse race narrative was utterly fundamental to them in Scotland.
No, sorry, you're just wrong, because they lost vote share. They've gone down 2%. They've lost thousands of votes, having run a by-election campaign, pouring national resource into one seat. There were tons of Westminster MPs being told to go up there. They didn't come to our event because I had so many people saying, sorry, I'm being marched up to Scotland to do it. They cannot replicate that next year, let alone at a general election.
But that's the point. Neither can the other two parties.
Yeah, but there's a particularly Scottish element here that we're not touching on, and that's the fact that Reform have come from nowhere to have more than a quarter of the vote with a man like Farage at the helm.
You're genuinely telling me that Labour HQ would have looked at the Chiron come up with lab gain and would have been glum about it?
I haven't said glum. They will be worried. I said they would be relieved, but they're not going to be over the moon at winning, with 30%, as they will not be relieved when they realise, and I think they are beginning to realise how shallow their very, very broad win was last year. Like, they are worried. They are worried nationally. Their campaigners are worried. Their Scottish MPs, I am telling you, are amongst the most frightened MPs in Parliament at the moment. And yes, they will be very glad that they won, but they will read the runes of how close it was, how it shouldn't be able to be that close. And they're not delighted about how things are going at the moment. They're just not, and that is the reality.
No, they dodged a bullet. And in that part of Scotland in particular, once upon a time, not too long ago, if Farage and Tice walked into a pub and started spouting, you'd have to say that they'd exit through the window. They just do not belong in that political environment. The word that was used to describe this election a lot in the media coverage, and actually in some work that our friend Luke Trill did, he did some polling and panelling work up there, was scunner. Scunner is a cracking Scottish word. It means disgust, what a scunner. And that was what all the mainstream parties were hearing from their voters on the doorsteps. It was this sense that we're absolutely fed up to the back of the teeth with the establishment parties. So we might as well roll the dice. We don't like Farage. We don't like a lot of what he stands for. But my goodness me, we don't like what Labour are doing nationally. We don't like what the SNP are doing in Holyrood either. The SNP are being accused of backpedalling on their sort of commitments to independence, for example. So there are all manner of problems afflicting the legacy parties. And a Reform, I should say, really, you would say, only have to sit back and not screw things up to maintain this sort of sense of a party on an upward trajectory. The Labour Party should be deeply, deeply concerned if they cannot register a more meaningful result than this in a by-election in a working class constituency like we saw this week.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
Kemi Badenoch's reaction was to come out today and say we should leave the ECHR. Maybe, she said, and then said definitely, but only after we have fully considered the implications. So maybe, but also we're definitely doing it. I mean, Jesus
Wasn't that the name
Christ,
of an Oasis album 30 years ago? Definitely, maybe.
What is she doing? Anyway, every question from a press pack, of course, was about the Hamilton by-election. Let's have a little listen.
Looking at the by-election result from last night, and Reform once again beating you, how embarrassing is that for you personally, and where does your party take this from here?
Larkhall is not the place where the Conservative Party fight back starts.
Badenoch's view is that the Conservative Party's rebirth was never going to start in this by-election. I guess there's some truth to that, but what we witnessed was not the lack of a rebirth. What we witnessed was like the final croak of dying.
Yeah, death rattle.
Here's my question. Isn't simply what is happening just the replacement of a right-wing party with another harder right-wing party, similar to what's happened in many, many countries across Europe, including, for instance, on the left in Greece 10 years ago.
It's not a straightforward replacement of like with like, though, is it? Because Reform are taking votes from Labour and the SNP in Scotland, for example. If you look at the figures, they couldn't have taken more than half their votes from the Conservatives because the Conservatives didn't have that many votes to lose in the first place. And Labour, lest we forget, when we're looking at the next general election, are coming from a really very poor performance. They've got 2/3 of the seats, but on 1/3 of the vote. It's not really good enough for them to hope that they can just about hang on. That is a recipe for disaster as far as the Labour Party is concerned, because the margins, particularly with Reform starting to close in on them, the margins are so thin that if they call that incorrectly, they're in a whole pickle of bother, I'd say.
It's not necessarily about them calling it incorrectly as it is about what happens on the right and whether there is a panic deal, mergery, alliancey thing between Reform and the Conservatives. What is much more likely to happen is that Badenoch is out and gets replaced by someone. And that someone may be a generic type figure who does not improve their fortunes one jot, or it might be something really quite different, maybe cleverly, maybe someone who doesn't currently have a seat, but is never too far from everybody's memories about 2019 in the form of one Boris Johnson making some kind of comeback.
No.
But depending on how all of that plays out, if you see any kind of a repeat...
Can you stop saying that, please? Because it might be like Candyman. If you say his name on a if you say his name on a podcast 3 times, he appears as a guest.
My more substantive point is the Tories are definitely in real trouble. And yes, Farage, as I have long written about and cautioned, is following the model of Preston Manning in Canada, leaving the Tory party, setting up the Reform Party, outpolling the traditional Tory party, and then some big merger conglomeration happens. The problem for Labour, as we've talked about before in the show, is they are losing 7 times more votes to left-wing parties than they are to the right. And so with those very small margins Kenny talked about in other parts of the country, that could really tip them down into danger territory. However, long way to go. Things are beginning to change. I think the recognition that something has got to be done differently is beginning to ruffle feathers a lot within the Parliamentary Labour Party, certainly. And I think we probably will see them move away from some of the stuff that has caused them to have their poll drop in recent times. But yeah, I do think that the Farage phenomenon is not unique to the UK. We are seeing recalibration of parties on the right, and it will sort of matter hugely whether the Lib Dems and Labour and Greens can do something to fend off a potential joint thing happening on the other side. Because at the moment, as long as there are Tories on a ballot paper, you are going to get some split of the right-wing vote, certainly in England constituencies at the next election.
If there is something to, I guess, work with for Labour out of this by-election, it might be that it will obviously be a very, very important factor in the Senate election, Holyrood election, in the London elections and the general election coming up in however many years, to unite the anti-reform vote. So my feeling is that an election in which they're expected to come second or third, and in which they do emerge as the winner by whatever skin of their teeth margin, it really strengthens their claim to being the alternative to reform.
Let's just close with my one thought then, that what's happening is we talk about uniting behind an anti-reform vote. Well, what's happening, and what's been happening this week, is that reform turned out to be the unifying operation here, and people are uniting behind reform as the anti-establishment vote, and that is pretty chilling in its own way.
Yeah, 26% people are uniting behind reform. I mean, that's what I mean. That's what I mean with just overreading a result. What we're seeing is the beginning of multi-party politics, like they've got in every other fucking country. It's just we're so used to binary politics that people look at the winner of an election doing it with only 30%. They go, oh my God, what's going on?
Because winner takes all in our system, that's why.
Yeah, sure. That's absolutely right. But you can't call 26% people are uniting behind reform. This is part of their shtick. This is their Tinkerbell power. The more people say, oh my God, people are uniting behind reform, 26% is not people uniting behind reform. 26% is the country fragmenting into 3-party politics or 4-party politics that we will see in some constituencies. That's the basis on which we have to work, not some primal fear that there is actually a sort of silent majority that's longing for proto-fascism.
No, but that's not what Kenny's saying. He's not saying that's not what he's saying, Alex. He's saying that there is a unification for something better than what we have had for the last however many years, 15 plus, that living standards have fallen. And whether you have fallen from being aspirationally working class conservative or dyed-in-the-wool working class Labour socialist voter or highly educated, I spent a fortune on my university and I can't get a job, middle classes, people are uniting to say, well, anything has got to be better than this. It's not that they are backing proto-fascism, it's an anti-vote against the establishment rather than a vote for whatever harebrained, madcap, burqa ban policies are being put forward by Nigel Farage's party.
Like I said, to me, 3 parties on 20% or 4 parties on 28% does not denote people are uniting behind anything. It denotes a complete fragmentation of our politics. And I don't understand how we can look at the same figures and come to such different conclusions, but there we are.
Nobody's disagreeing, Alex, that there is clearly huge fragmentation across British politics at the moment in every corner of the country. But the point being that that fragmentation in a first-past-the-post system is increasingly difficult for the Labour government. And it is for that reason that I think, A, they should definitely back PR, and they're not going to, but B, that they will be extremely concerned now about pursuing a situation in the run-up to the next general election, which is, if you don't like Farage, you have to vote for us. That's clearly not where voters are. It's not what they want. And I think they will struggle at the moment to unify people. And I do think that winning a by-election like that on such a small share of the vote, as has happened elsewhere, and of course they've lost a by-election to Reform in England in the last month as well, will mean that, yes, they'll be very relieved and delighted to have got through that by-election with a victory, but that they won't now think, let's carry on with the plan as is, because it is not a strong enough result to not have some reflection over whether or not the current trajectory is working for them.
Right, you two. That's more than enough for one weekend. So let's wrap things up. Apologies to our listeners for planting a Scottish Claymore landmine into the otherwise calm surroundings of Quiet Riot. Thank you so much out there for joining us.
Who knew we were
again.
all so passionate about Scottish politics?
Here's a bet that I would have lost. Well, we'll be back with the main show, in which we'll be delving into some hopefully slightly calmer Lib Demery following our Labour and Green deep dives last month.
Make sure to be subscribed so you never miss an episode.
But for now, we bid you farewell. Take it easy and remember how much we love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
And let us, for one last time.
Now, stop to think how happy the media and the Democrats are today. They always wanted to break this alliance. I said this last week, and today they got their wish.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.